Hello, everybody. My name is Jo Franchetti, and I am a developer advocate at Ably. If you've not heard of Ably, we are a platform which enables developers to stream real-time data. And as a developer advocate, my job is to write tutorials, to make demos, to do a lot of public speaking to make it easier for people to understand how to use the platform. I have been a web developer for about 10 years, and I've worked in many different sectors, from startups to big organizations, from charities to agencies, the civil service, and I even tried to be self-employed for a while, but I'm not very good at charging people, so that didn't really work as a business model. I am also a coach and organizer at Code Bar London. And what I'm trying to get across with all of this information is that I spend a lot of my time talking to developers and to the people who work with them, so designers, product managers, from all levels of seniority and from many different walks of life. And through talking to these people, I've started to notice some trends, and these are trends in behaviors and in beliefs and in complaints amongst people who work in the tech industry. And so to illustrate some of these, I'd like to tell you a story about a friend of mine. Let's call her Mo. And while I tell you about Mo, I would like you to see if you recognize any of her behaviors in yourself. So Mo is a web developer. She's got a few years of experience under her belt, and she works on a team with other developers in a medium-sized organization. She went to uni, mostly because her teachers told her that she should, but she feels like maybe she chose the wrong course. But at the time, she was too afraid to swap courses midway, so instead she graduated in a subject that she wasn't really that interested in. But once she graduated, she decided to completely reskill. She taught herself HTML and CSS with a view to becoming a web developer. But because she was self-taught, she's always had this niggling worry that her skills as a developer are not quite at the same level as her peers. And sometimes she worries that she doesn't know the correct names or the correct techniques for the code that she's using. But she doesn't want to ask her colleagues for help because she's afraid of letting on that she doesn't know these things. She imagines that they'll judge her, or worse, they'll fire her. She has this sort of imagination of this look on their faces when they turn around and they say, "How do you not know that? That's so basic." So she tries to keep up with web technologies by reading a lot of tutorials and attending events and meetups, but sometimes she feels that everyone else just gets the things that she struggles with. There are people out there who are writing new and awesome frameworks and tools, while she's still just struggling to learn the previous one. And sometimes she just feels like a fraud. And Mo follows a lot of web celebrities on various social media platforms to help her stay up to date. And she's always amazed at how the speakers at the events that she attends and these social media influencers are able to get done. They seem like they're creative geniuses. They never have to ask for help. They never get stuck. Their days just seem to have more hours than hers do. And they've all got side projects on the go. Now, Mo's got a few ideas for side projects, but she doesn't know how to get started on some of them, and others she just can't seem to finish. She's worried that people are going to judge them for being too unoriginal or too simple, so she never actually puts them in the public eye. She just keeps tweaking them indefinitely. And if she's really honest, sometimes she just doesn't want to face a side project. She sits at a computer all day at work. She doesn't want to do it when she gets home as well. And her worry about not keeping up with everyone and not being good enough tends to bother her throughout the day. Sometimes she's so worried that she can't concentrate on what she's doing. And then she worries that she's wasted time worrying. So she works longer hours and she takes fewer and shorter breaks. But she still doesn't ask for help because that would be giving her secret away. And in order to hide how worried she is about her own lack of knowledge, she starts attending more events and joining web-related organizations. And people often tell her that they don't know how she manages to fit it all in, but she just smiles and shrugs off their comments because that means that her cover is working. They're never going to find out that she's a fraud. And Mo sometimes finds that when she gets home from work or an event, she doesn't have the energy to deal with the chores that she needs to do around the house, or even with seeing friends. And her diet has become quite poor because of all the free pizza that she's eating. And she's drinking far more alcohol than she used to, but it's a free bar, so what you gonna do? And even though she gets to bed late, she struggles to get to sleep at night because she can't seem to get her brain to switch off. It likes to switch between worrying about her workload and running lists of all the jobs that she hasn't got done because she's doing so many hours of work. And her ability to concentrate at work continues to suffer because of this worry, because of her lack of sleep, because of her poor eating habits. And she finds herself procrastinating instead of getting work done. She'll do email, she'll do social media, anything to put off actually getting started, because she's worried that when she does start, her work is going to be judged. And then she panics when she thinks that she's not got enough done during the day. And her daily stand-up meetings become this absolute dread every morning. Maybe her team is going to wonder why she's not being productive. Maybe they're going to fire her. By the way, her team think that she's doing fine. They only ever see the output of the extra hours of work that she puts in, not the hours of procrastination that come before it. And one day while she's at work, Mo gets a colleague from an email saying that they found a mistake in a piece of work that she did. And something inside of her just kind of snaps. And she runs to the bathroom because she knows she's going to start crying and she doesn't want anyone to see. She cries uncontrollably for an hour, and once she's done, she cleans up her face and goes back to her desk and pretends that nothing happened, because everyone else seems to be able to cope with their workload. They just tell her to buck up her ideas. It gets to the point where Mo sometimes can't even face going into the office, so she calls in sick on those days. But she tells her boss that it's her physical health that's suffering and not her mental health. And Mo's mental health continues to suffer. She feels like there's a constant weight on her chest. She has heart palpitations during the day, and she frequently jolts awake at night with her heart racing. Finally, Mo has a panic attack at work. Her breathing becomes sharp and shallow, her vision blurs, and she falls on the floor and can't get up. She finally reaches out to a friend with a message saying, "I can't breathe." Thankfully for Mo, her friend was able to talk her back into calmness and helped her to realize that she needed to start facing her fears and her anxieties. She started therapy and she started learning about the causes of anxiety and stress. She learned that the kind of mental health issues that she was facing, which were anxiety related to imposter syndrome and perfectionism, actually plague many people in the tech industry, but often we don't talk about them. So if you recognize yourself in any of Mo's behavior, I'd like to talk you through some of it now. So I'd like to give you a short introduction to some of the things that Mo faced, along with some questions to ask yourself, some methods of recognition, and some self-care techniques, so that you don't ever have to go through what she did. Because I truly believe that the tech industry is an amazing place to be. We're changing the face of so many walks of life, and our own mental health has to be one of them. So let's get started. Let's talk about imposter syndrome. So you might have heard it called imposter phenomenon or imposter experience, but imposter syndrome describes the feeling that you haven't really earned your accomplishments, that by fraud or just dumb luck, you've ended up in the same place as others that you deem worthy, and you don't feel like you deserve to be there. And to call it a syndrome downplays how universal this feeling is. It's not a disease, it's not an abnormality, and it isn't necessarily tied to depression or anxiety. But it is prevalent in highly skilled and highly intelligent people, just like the people who like to work in the tech industry. So where do these feelings come from? People like yourselves who are skilled and intelligent tend to think that your colleagues are also skilled and intelligent, but this can sometimes cause you to judge yourself against others and to do so unfairly and harshly. This judgment can cause you to believe that you don't deserve the opportunities or the qualifications or the accolades that you've earned, or that in some way the skills that you've gathered aren't as praiseworthy as the skills of other people. And this can also be coupled by a belief that any qualifications or accolades you have earned aren't worthwhile anymore. Have you ever striven to achieve something only to feel like it came too easy? Or that someone maybe made a mistake in awarding it to you? Or that it isn't enough? It didn't bring you that feeling of completion that you were hoping for, and you have to start striving for the next thing and the next thing. Imposter syndrome doesn't let you feel any pride or joy in your achievements. And another problem with imposter syndrome is that our fears can be intensified by a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance. This is where we doubt ourselves in private, but we never voice our doubts. We believe that we're alone in thinking that way because no one else is talking about their worries either. And this can be especially exacerbated by things like social media, where people tend to only present their best achievements and their successes. People rarely purposefully publish their mistakes or their self-doubts or their foibles. So it becomes really difficult to know how we're doing in comparison to our peers, or how difficult they find certain tasks, or whether or not they ever get stuck or need to ask for help, or whether or not they ever doubt themselves. This means that there's no easy way for us to dismiss the feeling that we're less capable than those around us. So, with a view to sharing how prevalent this issue is, I'd like to share with you some famous and incredible people who have suffered from imposter syndrome. So first off, Maya Angelou, who's written 11 books and won many, many awards, felt like she hadn't really earned her accomplishments. She felt like she'd run a game on everybody and that they were going to find her out. Even the seemingly confident and talented Emma Watson feels like she doesn't deserve her achievements. She said, "I don't deserve any of what I've achieved." And if you can believe it, even Albert Einstein experienced imposter syndrome. He described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve as much respect as it had received. And talking with others about imposter syndrome is the best way to start recognizing your fears for what they are. They're normal, but they're immaterial, and they're certainly unfactual. Whenever I'm worrying that everyone around me knows more than me or that I don't belong, I like to think of this thing that I call Schrodinger's imposter syndrome. This is where I have convinced myself that all of my peers are far more intelligent and accomplished than I am, and I'm just some idiot who doesn't deserve to be around them. But somehow they are also so gullible and stupid that clever me has tricked them into thinking that I belong amongst them. Now, these two statements can't exist alongside each other and be true. My logic is fallible, and therefore, likely, so is my disbelief in myself. And we may never be able to banish imposter experience entirely, but we can have open and frank conversations with our peers, with our seniors, with our mentors and our friends, and build confidence that many people feel this way, and it doesn't mean that we have to give it any credit. So the second thing that I'd like to talk to you about is perfectionism. And when I was preparing for my first ever job interview for a tech job, I was given this piece of advice, which I'm sure all of you have heard. If an interviewer ever asks you what your weaknesses are, just tell them you're a perfectionist. Now, this particular piece of advice was given to me and countless others by my boss in my job at the time, and it's the kind of statement that makes eyes roll across the board. Everyone knows that it's a cop-out answer because you're not really revealing a weakness, right? Because employers want to hire perfectionists. Perfectionists do great work, right? They do perfect work. And it never occurred to me at the time, as I naively accepted this older and more experienced man's instruction, that I'd grow to learn the real truth behind this statement. Perfectionism in psychology is a personality trait characterized by a person striving for flawlessness and setting high performance standards, accompanied by critical self-evaluations and concerns regarding others' evaluations, says Wikipedia. Which sounds great. If I was an employer, I'd want to hire someone who strives for flawlessness, who sets high standards and cares about others' evaluations. They sound like a real achiever. However, perfectionism can often be a blocker to achievement. Imagine that you're constantly striving for perfection, not greatness, not excellence, actual perfection. You can't help but set yourself up to fail. Achieving perfection is not something that happens to most projects. And perfectionists measure our own self-worth by how able we are to achieve this perfection, by how much we can accomplish. And if accomplishments aren't attained, we can be very harsh on ourselves. The trouble is that for perfectionists, our performance is intertwined with our sense of self. When we don't succeed, we don't just feel disappointment in how we did, we feel shame about who we are. And perfectionists often engage in this thing called catastrophic, or you might have heard it called black and white thinking, where everything becomes either perfect or terrible, and even things that most people would call great or good enough fall into the terrible category. An example could be fear of publishing a piece of work, because somebody might find an error in it. The idea of somebody finding an error becomes this end-of-world scenario that you can't even face, rather than something manageable that you could work through if and when it happens. And I was diagnosed as a perfectionist about 2 years ago, and for me it was a relief to finally have a name to put to the stress that I was feeling. Every time I made a mistake or had a mental block, I spiraled into this depression and a kind of decision paralysis where I couldn't decide how to move forwards, which made my mental block worse and it made my disgust with myself greater. One time, the anxiety that I felt over my failure to produce a perfect piece of work was so bad that it manifested into crippling neck pain, and the doctors had to put me on Valium to force me to actually take some time out. And the problem is that the tech industry and capitalism and our society as a whole love it when we strive for perfection. They want us to be constantly building better, faster things, be the most successful, earn the most money so that you can spend it on becoming even more successful. And tech employers often encourage the unhealthy belief that we should constantly be striving to work harder, create more, to learn everything, as if it is even possible to learn everything. And we start to feel guilt when we're not working, and we shame ourselves for taking breaks. We work on our sick days, and we answer our emails when we're on holiday. And perfectionist employees will pressure themselves into tiredness, into depression and burnout, all while continuing to turn in excellent work, never daring to ask for help, because that would be admitting that they can't do something, that they can't be perfect. And much like those with imposter syndrome, perfectionists often disregard their own accomplishments because they're not enough. As soon as something that they were working towards is achieved, it's instantly disregarded because it doesn't bring that perfect feeling that they were hoping for. So they immediately start working on the next thing and the next thing. And it's an unsustainable and unhappy way to work and will very quickly lead to overwork and burnout. So if you're not sure whether you've ever had perfectionist tendencies, I'd like to ask you a few questions to consider. And firstly, this is the one that got me. Would you consider yourself a perfectionist? Now, if you answer, as I did, something along the lines of, oh no, there's no way I'm good enough to be a perfectionist, then I'm afraid I've got some news for you. Have you ever felt like you can't start a project because you can't decide on how to start? Somehow figuring out the perfect way to start is a blocker to even getting started. Have you ever found yourself repeatedly scrolling through social media or watching reruns on Netflix or even tidying your house when you knew you should be getting started on a project? And perfectionists procrastinate when we don't know how to start or finish a project. Not working on the project means that it can never not be perfect because it's never going to be finished. Have you ever left a project unfinished because you couldn't get it exactly how you wanted it? It's just not quite perfect yet, so you're just going to keep adding bits and tweaking bits, but you're not quite ready to show it to anybody yet or get anyone's opinion on it. Have you ever felt afraid or ashamed about asking for help from a colleague or peer? Because maybe that'll show them that you don't know something or that you can't manage something. And perfect people know everything, right? Better just to try that 1,000th Google search than to turn to the person next to you and ask how to do the thing. So what can we do both as perfectionists and friends of perfectionists to make the tech industry a better, safer, and kinder place to be? So the first thing that you need to do is to give yourself time. Sometimes you just can't tackle a problem. It's okay, it doesn't mean that you'll never be able to tackle it. It just means that you can't do it right now. Give yourself some time out and don't let feelings of guilt or shame take over. Take a half-an-hour walk or even a whole day or two away from the problem. But schedule in a start time for when you're going to try and tackle it again in the future once you're feeling calmer. Set deadlines and goals and targets that are realistic. Either set them for yourself or ask someone to help set them with you. Too much freedom can be stifling for perfectionists. We need something to aim for and then to improve upon. Given a blank canvas, we'll panic or we'll procrastinate or we'll start and abandon multiple projects. Setting achievable goals will allow you to strive for perfection or excellence while removing the paralyzing nature of the open-ended task. And setting schedules and deadlines means that at some point you will be encouraged to start the work that you're procrastinating on. Remember that perfect is the enemy of great. Perfectionism isn't about high standards, it's about unrealistic and unachievable standards. Getting something out is better than abandoning all of your hard work. And you'll likely be surprised that no one else will notice those imperfections that you thought were blockers. They'll probably think that your work is great. And try to acknowledge that you are your own most harsh critic. Most people don't expect perfection from other people. Perfectionists only think that they do. No one is going to judge you as harshly as you judge yourself. It's okay to make mistakes. Everybody does it. It's even okay to release code with mistakes in it. It's even okay if somebody sees a mistake in your code and tells you about it. You can thank them, you will learn something new, you will both move on with your lives, and the world will not end. It's easy to start putting yourself down when you don't meet your own unachievable expectations, but consider how you'd react if somebody said the things that you're thinking about yourself to one of your friends, or even if they just said them out loud. Now, this is one that really helps me. Try and think your fears through to their logical conclusion. Instead of the catastrophic or black and white thinking, like if I make a mistake in front of my colleagues, that would be the end of the world. Consider what the end of the world would actually look like. Consider the worst possible outcome of your fear, and then be honest with yourself about how likely that scenario actually is. And then you can start to consider how such an event might actually occur. So, let's say we've released some code, and it has a mistake in it. Instead of, oh my goodness, that would be the end of the world, let's think about the worst thing that could possibly happen. Our colleague finds a mistake. Our colleague stands up in the middle of the room and says, "You made a mistake. Get out. Never come back." And, it's shared around the entire internet that you made a mistake. You will never be hired in the tech industry again. Now, how likely is that outcome? Is it more likely that perhaps your colleague will go, "Oh, I noticed a mistake. Could you update that when you've got some time?" Yeah? Try and work your fears through to their logical conclusion, and you can get past that catastrophic black and white thinking. Teaching yourself to do this will save you hours of worrying. And the more that I've spoken about my experiences with perfectionism, the more people have told me about their own similar experiences. And with the tendency for intelligence and achievement in tech industry employees, it's perhaps unsurprising that so many of us suffer from perfectionism. And the more we talk about these issues, the less stigma we'll feel around dealing with them and around helping others through them. We can validate our own and each other's experience. It's okay to say, yeah, this is hard sometimes, tech is hard. The more open and communicative we are about mental health in the tech industry, the more pleasant a working experience we can make for everyone. And so the final issue that I'd like to talk to you about, and that I'd like you to watch in yourselves for, is anxiety. And anxiety is an entirely normal and natural feeling. Worrying about a new experience or a scary situation is understandable. But anxiety becomes a problem if you're feeling it generally or if you're feeling it over a long period of time. There's a theory that says that we learn anxiety as babies, that when we're tiny and helpless, we are entirely reliant on being lovable enough for somebody to give us everything that we need. And for some of us, that need to feel loved and accepted and the worry that we're not good enough never goes away. And we constantly need assurance that we're doing okay in comparison to everybody else. And in the last few years, we've been given some really powerful tools for checking how we're doing in comparison to everybody else. Social media, of course, I'm talking about you. It gives us instant validation on our decisions and our life choices. Posting on social media gives us a means of presenting the lives that we want our lives to be, and to get validation in the forms of likes and comments. But we can't help comparing the actuality of our lives with the beautiful, idealized illustrations that others have put out there. And we can constantly stoke our own fear that we're doing less well than everyone else. And imposter syndrome and perfectionism can both be causes of anxiety and can impact on your mental well-being. And record numbers of people are experiencing poor mental health according to the World Health Organization. Depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation are more common in the UK now than they have been ever before. And a good prediction of depression is self-criticism, which those with perfectionism and those with imposter syndrome are really good at. And worsening matters, being self-critical tends to lead to depressive symptoms, but those symptoms can then make your self-criticism worse, and it's a horrible loop. It's also been shown that one of the best protectors against anxiety and depression is self-compassion, which those of us who suffer from imposter syndrome and perfectionism are really not very good at. So how can we improve our self-compassion and our self-care? Because it really does take practice and patience. So firstly, the thing that I would suggest is you need to change where you look for validation. We're used to the ideas of the external signs of success. We get praise from our parents when we're younger. Our teachers give us grades to tell us how we're doing. We take exams and we do tests. And sometimes when we move on to a job or a career, we start feeling the need for that validation, but we can find it less readily. So we start looking to unhealthy sources for that validation. We want our boss to tell us that we've done a good job. We want to be on the highest salary that we can be on. We want the next Twitter or Instagram like. But the problem with external validation is that it's fleeting. 1 or 2 likes on social media can feel great, and a pay rise can feel amazing. But the problem is that the feeling eventually wears off, and we eventually go back to feeling insecure. Self-validation is the idea of accepting your own internal experience, your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. And it's knowing within yourself that you're enough and you don't need to perform for others. It's accepting good enough instead of perfect, because really it is good enough. Learning self-validation will allow you to calm yourself when you're in that panic or anxiety state. And being calmer will allow you to manage your internal mean voice more effectively and remember to listen to your kinder voice. So how can we learn to self-validate? The first thing that I would say to do is, instead of instantly resolving to change your behavior, first learn to recognize it in yourself. When you find yourself engaging in negative thoughts about yourself, or in procrastination, or checking your work Slack too often, acknowledge it and consider it. Once you've reached a point where you can notice yourself engaging in that bad habit, then you can start reasoning with yourself over why and reflect on what is causing it. If you're feeling insecure, consider whether it's really you or a societal pressure that's making you feel that way. If you find yourself procrastinating, let yourself have the time. You clearly want it, but schedule in a start time for later on in the day. And if you're checking your work email at midnight, check it, close it, realize that you did it, put the phone down, don't let yourself do it again. But don't berate yourself for it. Acknowledge it, accept that it happened, consider it, and then reflect on what might have been behind the issue, where the thought has come from, and think about how you can manage yourself in the future. And speaking of reflection, do any of you ever have trouble getting to sleep at night? I have this thing where I put my head down on the pillow and my brain goes, oh, finally, you stopped with all the distractions. Let's go through all the embarrassing things that you did today. And I'm just sort of lying there sweating instead of getting to sleep. It turns out you can avoid that by spending some downtime, either before bed or whenever suits you best, thinking about your day and how it went and how you felt about it. No phones, no screens, just you and your thoughts. Try and consider only the facts of your experience and don't make assumptions. So, I got 3 bugs fixed today and I feel great about it. I haven't got that 1 bug fixed though, and that's sort of worrying me. Or, my friend cancelled on me for lunch and I'm kind of pissed. Those are all valid experiences and valid thoughts. I didn't get that bug fixed because I'm a failure and I'm rubbish at everything. That's an assumption and that's not a fact. If you catch yourself doing that, try and consider where that thought might have come from. Are you being driven by a need for perfection? Are you believing the stories of capitalism, or dare I say it, the patriarchy? Accepting only the facts of your experience will help you to build trust in your own internal validation, and it'll help you to catch the bad habits quicker. And there are so many management methods for us to put in place. If you want it, there's work timing techniques like Pomodoro, there's extensions for your browser which can shut off social media over certain hours. Both iOS and Android let you turn your phone to grayscale during certain hours or grayscale out certain apps. If you have a tendency to work too many hours, try cutting down even in half-an-hour increments and see whether or not it makes a difference to how effective you're being. And allow your friends to help you through that catastrophic thinking. If you can't get through to that sensible way of thinking, next time you're having it'll be the end of the world scenario, just get your friend to turn to you and say, well, what then? After the world end, what happens tomorrow? But find the things that work best for you and give them a chance. And be truthful with yourself about what is and what isn't working, because we're really trying to change habits here and it takes time. And finally, get in touch with what helps to calm you when you're feeling anxious or overtired or just in need of a little bit of me time. For some people, it's a walk around the block or listening to music, meditation, or taking a bubble bath. But it has to be able to come from you and not from somebody else. It should be things that reduce your blood pressure and don't raise it. So posting to Twitter doesn't count. That's external validation. Texting your crush, also, sorry, doesn't count. Eating a kilo of chocolate or drinking a liter of coffee also don't count. Self-soothing is things that you can do for yourself to give yourself time to feel validated and happy and to step back out of that panic and anxiety state to a place where you can start thinking calmly again. And why am I telling you all of these things? Because I never want anyone else to go through what I did. In case you didn't guess, Mo is me. I don't want anyone to feel alone or unsupported, because I really think that by talking about it, we can increase awareness and learning about mental health in the tech industry. Because the tech industry can be a wonderful, empowering, and brilliant place to be, and we all deserve to be there. Thank you very much for listening.